As the year 1944 ends, Hitler opens a new offensive against the French front centered around Strasbourg, which had been liberated only a month before. Troubled by the fighting in the Ardennes, General Eisenhower orders an American withdrawal. General de Gaulle sends an envoy, General de Vigier, to protest to Devers, the American general commanding the sector. What was the general's attitude?
He was commanding a group of armies and very anxious himself. I found he was very torn between obeying the orders of his superiors and his personal feelings, because he told me, "General, I understand the French point of view because one of my grandmothers came from Strasbourg." He had tears in his eyes. And I felt that this man was absolutely tormented by the decision he had to take, and that he had to obey orders.
On the morning of January the 3rd, the Americans begin to carry out their orders to withdraw.
Having had 6 weeks of freedom after 3 years of continual pressures, continual fear, and to know that once again the Germans were coming back. It was more than I could stand. It was panic, real terror, like I'd never felt before, not even in the bombings or anything, but to know that they were going to come back.
Along with Madame Siegfried, the millions of Strasbourgers make for the interior towards the Vosges, towards the French army, for the 4th time in 2 generations. In deserted Strasbourg, the French freedom fighters organize the resistance. General de Vigier, who has been appointed military governor of the town, hastens to Paris to warn General Juin.
Juin took me by the arm and whisked me off, and we saw General de Gaulle, who, in front of the map, made me repeat what I had learnt the previous evening at Vittel. De Gaulle turned, very calm as always, to his chief of staff, saying, "Juin, you will do 2 things. You are going first to tell Delattre to take Strasbourg into his zone and to undertake the defense of Strasbourg himself. The second thing you are going to do is to prepare 2 telegrams. One is to Winston Churchill, the other to Roosevelt, to tell them that I have taken the decision to defend Strasbourg whatever happens."
Je prends la décision de défendre Strasbourg quoi qu'il arrive.
On January the 3rd, Churchill arrives in Paris. Drama. De Gaulle and Eisenhower are set against each other. Between policy and strategy, between good sense and sentiment, Churchill doesn't hesitate a second. With his help, de Gaulle finally convinces Eisenhower. Strasbourg must be saved. General de Lattre de Tassigny is ordered to defend the town. The 1st French army comes down from the Vosges to relieve the Americans. Time is not on their side. German radio is announcing that in a few days the swastika will fly again over Strasbourg Cathedral. As soon as he arrives, General de Lattre reassures the civilians. Strasbourg, liberated by French soldiers, will be defended by French soldiers. On that day, January the 7th, the Germans are no more than 25 kilometers to the south of Strasbourg. They clash with the 1st French army, who sacrifice themselves to delay the German advance. The survivors of the French Pacific Battalion are practically annihilated, and the Germans take many prisoners. In the outskirts of Strasbourg, the French resistance fighters under André Malraux hold the attack. For General Delattre and General de Vigier, the situation is very serious. In the south at Oppenheim, the sacrifice of the 1st Infantry Division and of the Malraux Brigade at Kraft has stemmed the enemy's advance. But in the north, in the Kielstedt region, the Germans are no more than 8 miles from Strasbourg. On January the 21st, the 3rd Algerian Infantry Division, veterans of Cassino, fight hand to hand in a new battle. A unit of the 2nd Armoured Division under Colonel Langlade arrives during the night, attacks and stops the German advance. Strasbourg is saved. Two weeks later, the Colmar area is cleared. On February the 11th, General de Gaulle comes to Strasbourg to attend a Te Deum at the cathedral. The long battle for the freedom of France is won. It has cost dearly to get as far as the Rhine, and the war isn't over yet. As they reach the banks of the river, everyone knows, everyone feels that down there, on the other side, Germany, still formidable, is preparing for a last-ditch stand. In the midst of the ruins of the Reich, Hitler still believes in miracles, the secret weapons. He's been talking about them for months, but this is the time to prove them. Hitler is triumphant. You'll see, we're going to destroy the Allied armies, and afterwards we're going on to conquer the world. With planes that fly at twice the speed of Allied fighters, like the Messerschmitt 262, thanks to jet engines, a new invention. The Luftwaffe's best pilots are already training to fly this plane, like Major Wilhelm Herget, who has chalked up 72 victories.
It was February 1945 when I saw this jet for the first time. I had a chance to fly it straight away, and the speed really surprised me.
Surpris sur la vitesse. Oui. Ici.
Yes, here. This is an instrument for measuring the airspeed, and this plane would do almost 600 miles an hour. It was the fastest plane in the world in 1945.
45, l'avion plus vite du monde.
At the beginning of 1945, 2 fighter groups are equipped with the Me-262s, commanded by General Galland. German inventiveness grows, and they build a rocket plane, the Messerschmitt 163, which will climb 10,000 feet in 1 minute. The German scientists have put in some good work. And that isn't all. On a little island in the Baltic, to the north of Germany, at Peenemünde, there are 2,000 scientists and technicians, the elite of the German universities, who have been working together for years on an ultra-secret project. Among them is an engineer, Helmut Habermann, and a physics professor, Otto Müller. Their boss is 32 years old. He's a young physicist with a touch of genius, Werner von Braun. For the moment, the Nazi war machine has claimed him. He's built a rocket for them, but it's not meant to go to the moon. It's a reprisal weapon, the V2.
Yes, this machine here had certainly held a ton of explosive. Behind the warhead was the equipment case, which contains all the direction finding and aiming devices, followed by the two fuel reservoirs, alcohol and oxygen. The alcohol and the oxygen went into the pumps under pressure and was then injected into the combustion chamber. Below that, we have a strong stream pipe which gives the exhaust gas great speed.
Donner au gaz sortant de l'engin une grande vitesse.
The first attempts are not very reassuring. Each time a rocket is launched, the Peenemünde scientists wonder whether it's going to fall back on their heads. And from time to time, it happens. All is not yet perfect. The guiding mechanisms, the coordinators, the radar. In 2 years, all the problems are going to be resolved by Werner von Braun's team of scientists and by General Dornberger, who is responsible for the V2 program. The V2 is operational. Range, 260 miles. Speed, 3,000 miles per hour. Nothing will be able to stop it. And for defense, to intercept enemy bombers, the scientists invent the ground-to-air missiles, the Schmetterling, the Butterfly, the Waterfall, and the Cataract. At the beginning of 1945, German scientists were still dreaming.
Encore penser à un engin.
We were still thinking of a long-distance rocket that would be able to travel 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers to America. We weren't thinking of going further at that moment. Of course, it was not the kilotons or the megatons of the atomic bomb, but at Peenemünde there was never any question of using an atomic bomb, and I don't know myself whether the question even came up.
Hitler launches 5,000 V2s in 6 months, 2,000 on London, 1,600 on Antwerp, and 30 on Paris. But the German inventions are too late. Only 5,000 tons of explosives in 6 months, while a single American bombing raid drops 3,000 bombs in 1 hour. At the beginning of 1945, the Allied air offensive redoubles in strength. The object is to break German morale. After the strategic raids, the raids of terror. On February the 3rd, 1945, 1,000 flying fortresses approach Berlin, capital of the Reich. the air defense posts in Germany are never left idle.
Achtung, Achtung! Luftklarmeldung vom Divisionsgefechtsstand. Eine Welle der feindlichen Flugzeuge hat die Flakzone im Süden erreicht und wird durch Flakartillerie bekämpft. Achtung, Achtung!
Like every other Berliner on that day, Herr Chmielewski dived into his shelter. Herr Chmielewski, how long did you spend in that cellar?
Adding it up, certainly more than 100. More than 100 nights during the war. That's to say, mostly in the months of November and particularly January 1945.
À partir du mois de janvier 45. Il y avait des gens qui tremblaient.
There were people who trembled,
D'une nervosité remarquable.
who trembled all the time. There were friends who were very nervous, and there were others who got used to it. But in general, for most people, the longer it went on, the more difficult it became. Because men's will to resist became weaker from week to week, even for the people who were for Hitler and his crowd. They were finding it was too much at the end.
Trouver à la fin que c'était insupportable.
Among the targets, the ministry offices in Wilhelmstrasse, Hitler's chancellery, Göring's air ministry, von Ribbentrop's foreign office, Goebbels' propaganda ministry, and Gestapo headquarters. For a year, 1 million tons of bombs have pulverized German towns and cities. 50,000 on Berlin alone. Thousands of dead. No one has been able to count the number. 1 million homeless. One woman saw that inferno, Frau Dubke. The picture is engraved on her memory.
The fire. The fire. That's the memory which stays after all these years. Not sleeping for months, night after night. Waiting during the day for the moment, it doesn't matter when, for it to start all over again. For weeks. Never eating, because hunger stopped one thinking. There's no place there for questions of philosophy, or even religion.
On February the 13th, a Tuesday, the Commander-in-Chief of Bomber Command, Bomber Harris, sends 3 waves of B-17s and Lancasters over Germany. Objective, Dresden. In their bomb racks, 650,000 incendiary bombs. Minutes after the attack, the flames are visible for 200 miles in all directions. In the center, the heat reaches 1,000 degrees, creating a tornado which knocks down walls and razes trees. A tempest of fire devours the town. 135,000 people, men, women and children, perished in the inferno. The war carries right into Berlin.
Ich schwöre bei Gott diesen heiligen Eid. Dass ich dem Führer des Großdeutschen Reiches Adolf Hitler bedingungslos treu und gehorsam sein werde. Ich gelobe, dass ich für meine Heimat tapfer kämpfen und lieber sterben werde.
The Nazis swear to lead the German people to the end, to the last German.
I swear solemnly before God to remain implicitly faithful and obedient to Adolf Hitler, the Führer of the great German Empire. I pledge myself to fight for my country with courage and to die for her.
January 1945. The Red Army prepares for the final assault. Objective, Berlin. Every Soviet soldier, from the humblest private to the most senior general, dreams of being the first to enter the capital of the Reich. Nearly all the victorious generals are still in the fight. Marshal Vasilevsky, former chief of Stalin's general staff. Chernyakhovsky, youngest commanding officer in the armed forces, and Ludnikov, hero of Stalingrad. Konev, defender of Moscow, and one of the conquerors of Kursk. Zhukov and Rokossovsky. General Rokossovsky, liberator of White Russia. General Zhukov, the man for desperate situations, the savior of Moscow, Leningrad, and Stalingrad. For weeks, the Soviet High Command has been poring over the plans for the great offensive. Army spokesman General Boltin explains the position.
The war taught us to respect the power of the enemy. That's why the Supreme Soviet Command did not count on an easy victory. They prepared for a long campaign.
When did the Soviet offensive begin?
The beginning of the Soviet offensive was brought forward hurriedly at the request of the Allies, expressed by Churchill in his letter to Stalin on the 6th of January. The Soviet troops took the offensive on January the 12th. The sudden attack was irresistible.
4 million Soviet soldiers advance along a front of 500 kilometers beside the Baltic Sea. Berlin is still only a distant objective. The armored divisions of Zhukov and Konev attacked the German front lines, advancing 200 miles in 15 days. But it takes weeks to liquidate the pockets of German resistance, like that at Poznan. The siege of Poznan lasts a month, and of the original force of 60,000 men in the garrison, only 23,000 are taken prisoner. The rest are dead. The commander of the garrison, General Metten, accepts surrender. His aide prefers suicide. A soldier wishing to escape dishonor, perhaps. Or perhaps a Nazi afraid of punishment at the hands of the Allies. For the atrocities committed here, in the Polish territory annexed by Hitler, include torture chambers and mass executions. For the Poles of Poznan, it's the end of a nightmare which has lasted 5 years. The end of the nightmare, too, for the French prisoners, entombed in the Silesian camps ever since Dunkirk. The end of the nightmare for the pitiful swarms of refugees. The end, too, for those whose train has halted here in the frozen countryside, overrun by the advance guard of the Soviet army. At the end of the road waited Majdanek, Treblinka, and Auschwitz, the factories of death. Auschwitz, the final iniquity. 4 million human beings were exterminated here, methodically and systematically. The Russians enter the camp on January the 27th and find only a few thousand survivors, numbered for life with the tattoo of the SS. One knew from the newspapers that these things happened, but one couldn't believe it when you saw the mountains of women's hair, when you found an outhouse where there were thousands of little children's shoes and clothes. It's the most distressing moment of the war for the liberating armies. By the end of January, the Russians are inside Germany. Nazi Germany. Hated Germany. Germany, who for the last 6 years made Europe and the world tremble. Leaving a blazing trail of shattered towns and villages in their wake, Konev's troops occupy High Silesia. Zhukov's forces overrun Pomerania and Brandenburg to the very heart of Prussia. Hitler, waiting in vain in his eagle's nest, returns hurriedly to Berlin, fuming. All his generals are traitors. The majority of them he demotes. Anyone who is not 100% behind him is arrested. He replaces them with thoroughgoing Nazis like Goebbels and Himmler. His hysterical outbursts re-echo throughout the Reich. We will never surrender. Protect our wives and children against the Red Hordes. Victory or Siberia. The first columns are crossing the bridges of the Oder. Refugees fan out like frightened ants before the might of the Russian army. The Oder, last rampart to the east. By personal order of the Führer, establish a line of defense all along the river immediately. Send 4 divisions there. He gives them important sounding names, as if he's dealing with crack troops. But it's obvious that these are untrained men with no proper equipment. By personal order of the Führer, turn the principal towns on the Oder into fortresses. By personal order of the Führer, send 2 divisions of the Armored Corps to hold them, these to be brought back from the Ardennes front. Hitler orders, Hitler demands, to no effect. On paper, 1 million men are drafted to defend the Oder. In fact, there are only 200,000. When the Russians advance, it's obvious that they have a 5-to-1 superiority in numbers. Does anyone still believe in Hitler? Does anyone still believe in Germany? Don't ask questions. Obey the personal orders of the Führer. From the least damaged airfields, a few survivors of the Luftwaffe are taking off for a last mission at odds of 10-to-1 against. One of those pilots, 29-year-old Colonel Rudel, lost a leg on a dive bombing mission. 3 weeks later, he returns to fight again, and with the 2 cannon he has installed in his Stuka, knocks out his 2,000th tank. At the beginning of March, Churchill visits the Siegfried Line, now as useless to the Germans as the Maginot Line was to the French in 1940. That job's finished, muttered Churchill, but now we must cross the Rhine. The Rhine, Germany's last rampart in the West. Cross this, and the days of the Reich are numbered. From Nijmegen to Alsace, Hitler has ordered all the bridges to be blown up. March the 7th, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the reconnaissance platoon of Lieutenant Emmett Burroughs of the American 9th Armored Division discovers, still intact, the railway bridge at Remagen. He advances his troops to the other side of the Rhine and alerts HQ. They can hardly believe their good fortune. The armored divisions of the 1st American Army are quickly brought up and cross the Rhine, courtesy of the 9th Armored Division. Hitler throws a new tantrum. The sappers of the German Army Engineers, whose explosive charges failed to detonate, must be shot. He demotes Field Marshal von Rundstedt. He sends Stukas, Skorzeny's frogmen, and even 11 jet bombers to try and blow it up. Without success. 5 American divisions cross the Rhine. 10 days later, the Remagen Bridge collapses of its own accord under the weight of armor it has had to carry. But too late. For now, the Americans have a solid bridgehead. Further north, the 9th American Army attacks Cologne on the Rhine. Miraculously, in the middle of the ruined city, the celebrated towers of the cathedral, over 500 feet high, are still standing as they have for 7 centuries. The framework of the railway station, too, is intact, but the trains are immobile. The entire German transport organization is disrupted. To the north, facing the Ruhr, the British themselves are crossing the Rhine. On March the 24th, at 9 a.m., 1,700 planes and 1,300 gliders lift 14,000 men to the other side of the river. Their mission? To encircle the Ruhr. The bloody failure of Arnhem hasn't shaken Montgomery's confidence in his paratroops. The operation is successful, but with heavy losses. British and Canadians encounter the German paratroops, and it takes 2 days of hard fighting by the Highland Light Infantry and Canadian troops backed by British tanks to take possession of the town of Speldrop and consolidate the bridgehead. To the south, in the Palatinate, the French crossed the Rhine in their turn at Gemmersheim on March the 31st. The 2nd Armored Corps of General Montsabert, Algerian and Moroccan sharpshooters, and the freedom fighters of Colonel Fabian, supported by the 5th Armored Division, take Karlsruhe 3 days later. On the other side, to the east, while the offensive on the Oder is halted, 4 groups of the Soviet army are surrounding East Prussia, where there are 500,000 German soldiers. Zhukov makes a movement towards the north, in the direction of the mouth of the Oder, while the armed forces of Bagramian and Chernyakhovsky lay siege to Königsberg and Danzig. Rokossovsky, too, turns towards the north and presses on towards the Baltic. The 3rd Tank Corps of Rokossovsky's guards takes Koslin and reaches the Baltic in 2 days. By March the 1st, East Prussia is cut off from the rest of Germany. Meanwhile, Bagramian and Chernyakhovsky are surrounding Königsberg. Day and night, Soviet planes hammer the town. Among the fighters escorting the Soviet bombers is one French squadron, Normandy Niemann. Before the Battle of Königsberg, it's decorated with the Order of the Red Flag. All Russia already knows the faces of these French, who have chosen to come and fight at their side in the blackest hour of the winter of 1942. For the Russians, they've become comrades in arms, heroes of the Soviet Union. They are 100 strong. 56 of them are to be killed in battle. Airborne in their yaks, they win 273 victories. In the smoke of the bombs and shells, the 230,000 defenders of Königsberg hold out for 2 months. Admiral Dönitz sends the cruiser Prince Eugen and the last units of the Kriegsmarine to support the besieged town. All available ships are sent to save as many people as possible. For the civilians who wander like ghosts, abandoned by the troops, there's no place in the boats. There's only one way, the frozen sea. They stagger and slide onto the ice of the Baltic Sea, quitting the Slavic lands conquered by Teutonic warriors. They escape any way possible towards the west, towards a Berlin in ruins. On March the 28th, Rokossovsky's Russians and the Polish troops under his command take Danzig. Danzig. Everything began here in 1939. When he snatched the Polish town, Hitler said, "Who would die for Danzig?" In the event, 36 million died for Danzig. Today, the Polish flag flies over the town. Danzig is once again Gdansk. In front of Königsberg, which still holds out, Marshal Vasilevsky comes to replace General Chernyakhovsky, killed in combat. On April the 6th, he makes a final assault. The Russians take 84,000 prisoners, dazed and holed up in cellars. As Marshal Vasilevsky at last contemplates the statue of the most celebrated of Prussians, Bismarck, Königsberg has become Kaliningrad. East Prussia, fatherland of German nationalism, is struck off the map. From now on, the Soviet soldiers are at home, on Soviet territory. It's not only that they've conquered the actual territory, but also the enormous industrial potential of Germany, the shipbuilding industry of the Baltic, the factories of Silesia. Immediately, the Russians begin to take the machinery to pieces and dispatch it to the Soviet Union. What's to be done about the loot? What's to be done about Germany? What's to be done about Europe? Already, the Allies are wondering about the future.
15 major battles of the Second World War. Their impact was enormous and decisive. See newly released documentary footage on the dramatic encounters in the Atlantic and the Pacific. See the great historical battles in Russia, the Normandy landing, the bombing of Berlin, the invasion of Italy. See the big battles of World War II, the fateful encounters upon which hung the destinies of men and nations. See the big battles.